Hello, welcome to this lesson of Mastering 5th Grade Math. Here we're going to talk about writing whole numbers as fractions. We kind of already talked about this a little bit in the last section when we talked about the fact that every fraction that you've seen can be thought of in terms of division. So every fraction, whether it's 1/2 or 2/4 or 8/2 or whatever, it's really numerator divided by denominator. That's what it represents. It's just sometimes those fractions you can do the division and simplify it, and sometimes like 1/2 you can't really divide it, and so you just leave it written as a fraction. Well, in this case, what if I give you the number 3, knowing that fractions really represent division? How could I write the whole number 3 as a fraction? How can I write it as a fraction? For some reason, if I wanted to write the number 3 but express it as a fraction, how could I do it? Well, since I know that all fractions basically behave like division, I can write the number 3 as 3/1. Now when you look at this, and now that you know that fractions really represent division, if you take 3 and divide it by 1, and you just get the number 3. So the whole number 3 can be written as 3/1. Okay? What about the number 5? How do you write the number 5 as a fraction, if for whatever reason you needed to? Well, you could write that as 5/1, again, because 5 divided by 1 gives me 5. What if I had to write the number 8 as a fraction? I think you see the pattern here. You just take the number and you stick it over 1, because this is basically a division symbol right here. So any whole number that you have, you just stick it over 1. And it goes up. It doesn't matter how big your number is. If you want to represent 11 as a fraction, it'd be 11/1. If you wanted to represent the number 17, you can represent it as 17/1. So it's exactly the same as we talked about in the last section, because every fraction represents division. So anytime you have a fraction with something over 1, it's representing a whole number. And that's very important for you to remember in your studies. Now, if I wanted to go backwards, I can certainly go backwards. What if I were given this fraction, 16/1, and I was told to simplify this fraction, right? Well, the first thing I'm going to try to do when I simplify a fraction is see, can I just divide the thing and simplify it that way? In this case, I can see 16 divided by 1. Of course, it divides evenly, it gives me 16. So to simplify this, I can just write the whole number 16 down. What if I were given 9/1 and I was trying to simplify that fraction? First thing I'm going to look for is to see if I can divide 9 divided by 1, and of course I can. I get 9. And then finally, what if I got something crazy like 34/1, and I wanted to simplify that fraction? So I just first try to divide. That's my first thing I do, and of course I can. Anytime a fraction is over 1, you can simplify it by just doing the division, which gives you a whole number. Which leads me to the next thing that's extremely important. Now that you know that all fractions really represent division like this, what does this simplify to? 10/10. Again, the first thing you do when you try to simplify fractions is you look and you say, can I just do the division? Because all fractions represent division. 10 divided by 10, of course I can. I get the number 1. So 10/10, the fraction 10/10, gives me 1, which makes perfectly good sense to you, because if I take a pizza and I cut it into 10 pieces, and then I take those 10 pieces, the numerator, and that's what I take for myself, I have 10 out of 10 pieces. That's the whole thing. That's the whole pizza. So it represents 1 whole pizza. Likewise, if I have the fraction 6/6, what does that reduce to? Well, since all fractions are division, you can just simply divide that and get the number 1. And this makes sense in terms of pizza. If I cut a pizza in 6 pieces and I take all 6 pieces, I have the entire pizza. And finally, you can just continue going down here, 2/2. Another example, anytime you have anything over itself is basically 1. That's basically what we're doing here. Even if you have something simple like 1/1, you just get 1. And our final one, even a crazy number like 67/67, it reduces to 1, because this behaves like division. All right, so there's a couple of things in this section I wanted you to make sure you understand and practice with. One of them is that anytime you have a fraction where the numerator and denominator are the same, it's just going to be 1. That's what it's going to reduce to. That's because fractions are division. 6/6 is 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and so on. Next thing we wanted to talk about is if you have a whole number, you can represent it as a fraction. So any whole number can be represented as the number over 1. Again, that's because fractions are division. And you can go backwards. You can represent 16/1 as 16 for the same exact reason. So I have a few different kinds of problems on the board, but basically it's all the same thing. when you're doing your fraction problems, especially when you're simplifying something, before you try to simplify the fraction any further, first just see if you can just divide the numerator by the denominator, because that's what a fraction can be thought of. It can be thought of as division. And if you can do that division in a whole number fashion, then just do it, because that's what every fraction is. And if you can't do a whole number division, then you can use your the other ways we learn to simplify fractions to make it look simpler. But the first thing you should do is try to do the straight division. And that's something that you can always do with fractions. So make sure you understand this material here. And I think this concludes the set of lessons in mastering 5th grade math in terms of fractions. We still have a lot of material to cover in the future, of course. We need to learn how to add fractions together and how to subtract fractions and how to multiply and divide them. And how do you handle it when you have mixed fractions and improper fractions? Of course, all of those are very important topics. But what we have covered here in this set of lessons is incredibly important. And the reason that it's so important is because it builds the foundation. At this point, you guys watching this know what a fraction is, and you know how to simplify a fraction, and you know how to convert a fraction from mixed to improper and back and forth. You know how to handle it when you have something over 1 like this. You know how to handle it when you have the numerator and denominator equal. Those are all very, very important topics, because when we get into adding and subtracting fractions, you're going to run into this stuff a lot. And so by knowing this, everything in the future will be much, much, much easier. So make sure you understand this material. Go grab the worksheets, work your problems in there, make sure you understand all of this, and then go into the next volume of math.